Welcome to Zama Victor English and Literature Academy, the home of English language and literature. Today, I'm going to lecture you on the meaning of active and passive voice. I'm going to lecture you on the meaning of active and passive voice. Now, I'm going to lecture you on the meaning of active and passive voice. By the way, let us look at the objectives of this course. Now, having gone through this course or having gone through this topic, I'm going to explain to you today. I want you to understand the following. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to know the meaning of active and passive voice. You should be able to know the meaning of passive and active voice. Explain the rules governing the formation of active and passive voice. You must know the rules governing the formation of active and passive voice in various transitions. 3. Turn the sentences into active and passive voice. Know how to turn a sentence into an active or passive voice. Determine the passive and active voice in a sentence. Determine whether a sentence is active or passive voice. Now, I'm going to explain to you what is active and passive voice. I'm going to explain to you the meaning of active and passive voice. What is active and passive voice? Now, in English language, as the case may be, there are two types of voices. A voice can be active or passive based on the temperament of the speaker, based on the speech or report of a writer or a speaker in a sentence. Now we have two kinds of voices which are active and passive voice. We have two types of voices which are active or passive voice. An active voice, what is an active voice? An active voice in the active voice, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb in a sentence. In active voice, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb in a sentence. I said it again. In active voice, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb. Whereas in the passive voice, the subject receives the action expressed by the verb. I say it again. In a passive voice, the subject receives the action expressed by the verb. While in active voice, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb. Here are the rules governing the formation of active and passive voice. I want to explain to you the basic rule in the formation of active and passive voice. The following are the rules governing the formation of active and passive voice, which are number one is that in active the sentence must have an object or subject. The sentence must have an object or subject. That is number one. Or the sentence must have an object or transition verb. The sentence must have an object or transition verb. The object in active voice, listen carefully, the object in active voice became the subject in passive voice. The object in active voice become the subject in passive voice. The subject in active voice becomes became the subject in a passive voice, while the subject in active voice is converted into passive voice by preceded by objects. Let me say it again. While in the subject in active sentence is converted into passive sentence that is preceded by objects by the word by. By is usually introduced by the object when a sentence is converted into passive voice. That is what I'm trying to say there. That in any sentence, when you want to convert it in active voice, then it is preceded by the object. The object becomes the subject of the sentence, introduced by the word, by the preposition by. It can be introduced by the preposition by. When a sentence is converted into passive voice, the object becomes the subject of that sentence, and it's usually most times it's introduced by the word by, or the by is introduced by the preposition by. Then the verb in the passive voice, listen carefully. The verb in the passive voice is past participle. The verb in the passive voice, the verb used in the passive voice is past participle. I said it again. The verb used in the passive voice is past participle, must be in past participle. It must be in past participle. Then, in the active voice, the subject of that sentence does the action. In active voice, the subject of the sentence does the action or perform the action. That is what I'm saying there, is that in active voice, the subject of the sentence performs the action or carries out an action. In fact, in active voice, the subject is the doer or the performer of an action. Finally, in the passive voice, the subject of the sentence receives the action. I said it again. In the passive voice, the subject of the sentence receives the action. I come again. In the passive voice, the subject of the sentence receives the action. Now, having known this rule, let us look at the chart table below. Consider the table above. I'm showing you now. Let us look at the table. The voice, the active and passive voice. The active and passive voice. What the subject does in active voice, what the subject does. In active voice, what the subject does, whereas the passive voice focuses on the action. Passive voice focuses on the action, while active voice does the work. The subject is the doer or does an action, whereas in the passive voice, it focuses on the action, which is the subject receives an action in the passive voice. Now consider the two sentences above. Consider these two sentences for illustration. Let us look at the sentence there. Active sentence. Ram killed Ravel. The ram, you can say it. Ram killed the raven. In passive voice, Raven was killed by the ram. Raven was killed by a ram. Raven was killed by a ram. Whereas in the active voice, ram killed Raven. Now you can see in the second sentence, Raven, the ram became the object of the passive voice, whereas the the object in the active voice became the subject, and it was introduced in the passive voice with the preposition by, as it states in the rule above, which I already stated for you. That is why in the rule states that in the active voice, the subject is the doer of the action, which is the ram killed the raven. Whereas in the passive voice, the object is the doer of the action, and the subject receives the action in the passive voice. Raven was killed by ram. Raven was killed by the ram, and the verb is in the past participle. Consider it, and the verb is the past participle. The verb is in the past participle. Now look at how active voice changes to passive voice. Please, bearing those rules which I stated earlier, bear those rules in mind which I have already stated earlier. Now look at the above sentence. Consider the above sentence there. Ram killed raven. Ram killed raven. Subject, verb, and object in the first sentence is active voice. Ram killed raven. Now look at the second sentence, which is in the passive voice. Raven was killed by the ram. Raven was killed by ram. Raven was killed by ram. Raven was killed by ram. Now you can see that the verb was in the past participle. The main verb assisted by the auxiliary verb was in the past participle. Then in the first sentence, the subject is the ram. Now in the second sentence, the raven was, which is in the active voice, raven was changed to the subject. That is the rule. Look at the second sentence. Ram killed raven. Ram killed raven. Ram killed raven. In the active voice, raven was killed by a ram. Raven was killed by a ram. You see that the subject in the active sentence become the object in the passive sentence, which was introduced by preposition by, and the verb is in the past participle. Now see the following sentence below. She helps him. She helps him. She helps him. Active voice. Now in the passive, it becomes he is helped by her. He is helped by her. You see it? The object she becomes her, whereas he turns into him in the active voice, whereas she turns into her. The verb preposition is in the preposition. It was introduced by the preposition by. Now the verb is in the past participle. Consider the second sentence. I am buying a pen. I am buying a pen. I am buying a pen. Then in the second sentence, a pen is being bought by me. A pen is being bought by me. Now look at the sentence below. You can see that I, it changes to me. The subject I in the passive sentence changes to me. In the subject I in the passive sentence changes to me the subject in the passive sentence, in the active sentence, the subject in the active sentence changes to me in the passive sentence. And a pen, which a pen or pen become the object. Pen become the object. Pen in the active sentence become the subject in the passive sentence. A pen is being bought by me. Now look at the sector sentence. He has to teach us. 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 Now, in the second sentence, in the second sentence, which is the passive voice, we has to be taught by her. Us changes to we in the passive sentence, whereas he changes to him in the passive sentence. Him in the active sentence changes to him in the passive sentence, which was introduced by a preposition by. Which is introduced by a preposition by. See the last sentence, which is someone is following us. Someone is following us. In the passive sentence, someone is following us. Now, in the active sentence, we are being followed. We are being followed. Now, the someone in the active sentence is changed with we. Someone is omitted, whereas us is changed to we. Then the verb is was followed by the verb, was changed by the verb being. Auxiliary verb being. Now let's look at the other sentences. Consider the rules again, once more again. Let us look at the rules, basic rules, once more again. Once again. Let's look at the basic rule once again. Once again. Now, bring me an object first. First, let us look at the basic rule again. Bring the object first. Bring the object first. That is, I say that in active voice, the object becomes the subject of the sentence, whereas in active sentence, the subject is the doer of the action. Then the subject in active sentence becomes the object in passive sentence. That's what is meant by bring the object first. 2. Choose the correct verb be. You have to choose the correct verb be. You have to choose the correct verb be. You have to choose the correct verb be. Now, change the verb into past participle. As I say that, the verb must be in past participle. The verb must be in past participle. Now, add by followed by the object of the sentence. You must add by followed by the subject, which is in passive voice, the subject becomes the object of the sentence. Look at the sentence above. She helps him. She helps him. Now, which she helps him is in the passive voice. She helps him is in the passive voice. Now, look at the active voice there. Him, she changes to her in the passive voice. He is helped by her. He is helped by her. He is helped by her. She changes to her. She changes to her. Him changes to him. The verb is in the past participle. The verb is in the past participle. Now, look at the basic changes of active subject and object in active voice. Look at the basic changes in object and subject in active voice. I changes to me. I changes to me. We changes to us. You changes to you. They changes to them. They changes to them. He changes to him. He changes to him. She changes to her. She changes to her. Now, let us consider the following sentence. Let us consider the following sentences. If there are two objects, 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 likely the sentence must has two alternatives with a correct verb and preposition. If there are two alternatives, if there are two objects, if there are two objects, we have two alternatives in the answer. Consider the sentence below. Consider the sentence below. We are told a story by her. We are told a story by her. Okay, in the active sentence, she told us a story. 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 Now, in the active or in the passive voice, we realize these two alternatives, which are we were told a story by her. We were told a story by her. Or we said a story was told to us by her. A story was told to us by her. Let me say it again. We are told, let me say it again. She told us a story. She told us a story. She told us a story. It's the active voice. Now, in the passive voice, we have two alternatives, which are we are told a story by her. We are told a story by her. A story was told to us by her. Then consider the second sentence. They appointed him an ambassador. They appointed him ambassador. They appointed him an ambassador. They appointed him an ambassador. Now, in the passive voice, we have two alternatives, which are he was appointed ambassador. He was appointed ambassador. He was appointed an ambassador. He was appointed an ambassador. Then an ambassador was appointed to him. 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 Then the third sentence. The story has taught us a good lesson. 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 Now, in the realization, we have two alternatives, which are we have been taught a good lesson by the story. Remember, the verb is in the past participle. We are being taught a lesson by the story. We are being taught a lesson by the story. Or a good lesson has been taught to us by the story. A good lesson has been taught to us by the story. A good lesson has been taught to us by the story. Now remember that the verbs are in the past participle and the objects become the subject in the object become the subject in the passive voice, whereas the subject become the object, whereas the subject become the object in the passive voice, whereas the object become the subject in active voice. Now let's look at it. The subject of the sentence in active voice become the subject in passive, whereas the object in active voice become the subject. Having known that, let us look at this sentence below by using the auxiliary verbs shown below. The auxiliary verb have, had, is, am, are, was, were are mostly used in formation of assisted by the main verbs. Now let's look at the following below. The sentence below. She has helped us. Active sentence. She has helped us. She has to help 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 us. Now, in the passive voice, we have to be helped by her. We have to be helped by her. Observe the verbs. The verbs is the past participle in the active voice. The verb must be in past participle and introduced by a preposition by. Now look at the second sentence. She has to change to her. Us changes to we. The verb have is introduced and the main verb is helped, past participle, helped. Now let's look at the second sentence. We have to learn English. We have to learn English. We have to learn English. Now is the passive sentence. Is the active sentence. We have to learn English. We have to learn English. Now in the second sentence, which is the passive sentence, English has to be learned. English has to be learned. Now we is omitted. English has to be learned. Now look at the English, which is the object, become the subject in the passive sentence. The verb have changes to be in the passive sentence. Now look at the third sentence. I had to wait the bus. I had to wait. I had to wait the bus. I had to wait. I had to wait the bus. Now which is the active sentence, I had to wait the bus, which is the active sentence. Then in the passive sentence, it becomes in the passive sentence it becomes the bus has to wait by me. The bus has to wait by me. The bus had to wait by me. The bus has to wait by me. Now, having known this, consider the uses of these auxiliaries in the sentence and observe the changes in the subjects and the objects in the sentence. Now, let us consider the use of modal auxiliary verb. Let us consider the use of modal auxiliary verbs in a sentence in formation of active and passive voice. Let us consider the uses of modal auxiliary verbs, modal auxiliary verbs in the formation of active and passive voices. Now look at the first sentence formation there. She can speak Chinese. She can speak Chinese, which is a passive sentence, which is the active sentence. Look at the active sentence. She can speak Chinese. Now in the passive sentence, Chinese can be spoken by her. The verb is always in the past participle in passive sentence. Now look at the second sentence. We preserve the tigers. We must preserve the tigers. We must preserve the tigers, which is the active sentence. We must preserve the tigers. Now, in the passive sentence, tigers must be preserved. Tigers must be preserved. Notice that in the passive sentence formation, by the use of modal auxiliary verbs, the verb be the verb is not in the past participle. In the tradition of modal auxiliary verbs, the verb is not in the past. The verb is in the past participle. Consider it. The verb must be in the past participle. Now, having known this, let us look at the other use of modal auxiliary verbs. Now, look at the sentence above. The use of auxiliary verb must have, should have, could have, might have, would have, with the verb, with the use of three modal auxiliary verbs. The use of three modal auxiliary verbs combination. Now look at the sentence formation in the active sentence. He should have stolen my pen. He should have stolen my pen. He should have stolen my pen. In the active formation, it becomes my pen should have been stolen by him. Now he changes to him, and the pen in the pen which is the object in the active voice become the subject in the active voice. Now look at the second sentence. They must have left any sign. They must have left any sign. They must have left any sign. Now in the passive voice, it becomes a sign must have been left. Any sign must have been left. Any sign must have been left. Having known this, let us consider other things, other modal auxiliary verbs like the use of can, could, should, might, will, would, and must, which are the use of to, the use of verb, modal auxiliary verbs, can, could, shall, should, might, will, would, must. Now look at the first sentence in active voice. She can speak Chinese. Okay, I already said this again. I already said this earlier. I have already said this earlier on. Now let's go to this. I have already said it earlier. Look at the sentences below. I have already said it earlier. Now let us come to the use of needs to. All these are formation of auxiliary verbs. Now, having learned all this, let us learn to form negative sentences. Negativity or negative sentence, formation of negative sentences in passive and active voice. Negative sentence remain. Let us see that. Look at the first sentence. Now, they have not stolen my pen. They have not stolen my pen. They have not stolen my pen, which is the active voice. Now, in the passive voice, it becomes my pen has been stolen. My pen has not been stolen. My pen has not been stolen. Now, pen become the subject in passive voice, whereas this they is omitted because it's a speaker. Now look at the second sentence. They must not have left any sign. They must not have left any sign. They must not have left any sign, which is the active sentence. In the passive sentence, it becomes any sign must not have been left. Any sign must not have been left. In the third sentence, it becomes nobody has done homework. Nobody has done homework. In the passive sentence, it becomes homework has not been done. Homework has not been done. Now let us remind the rules once more again, which will lead us to the end of this discourse. Now let us look at the rules once more again. We say that in active sentence, the subject performs the action expressed by the verb. In active sentence, the subject expresses an action performed by the verb. Whereas in the passive sentence, the subject receives the action performed by the verb. In passive sentence, the subject receives the action performed by the verb. The rules are as follows again. The rules in formation of active and passive voice. The rules in the formation of active voice. Now, the first rule is that the sentence must have an object or transitive verb. The sentence must have an object or transitive verb, or the sentence must have an object. 2. The object in active sentence becomes the subject in passive sentence. The object in active sentence becomes the subject in passive sentence. 3. The subject in active sentence converted into the passive sentence by the introduction of the subject in active sentence is converted into passive sentence, that is preceded by the object by, or it is introduced by the preposition by. In the subject in active sentence is converted into passive sentence by introduction of by the use of the word or preposition by in the passive sentence. Now, the verb must be in past participle. The main verb must be in the past participle. Or past participle, that as I said. In active voice, the sentence does the action. In active voice, the subject does the action. In the active voice, the subject does action. Whereas, finally, in the passive voice, the subject of the sentence receives the action. In the passive voice, the subject of the verb receives the action. Having done this, we have come to the end of this lesson. Welcome once more to Zama Victor English and Literature Academy, the home of English language and literature. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for other information in literature in English. In literature in English. I love you all. Thank you. Subscribe.